There is serious doubt that it happened exactly as we have been told it happened. The story we have been told is that on October 31st, 1517, Martin Luther walked down to Wittenberg Cathedral, hammer in hand, and nailed 95 theses, statements, arguments, talking points to the cathedral door, and thus began the Protestant Reformation. It has been the subject of paintings and films and dramatic depiction. You can see it right now in the movie screen of your mind. And it couldn't be lovelier if it were true. To heap all of the credit on Luther would be an injustice. The waves of the Reformation began long before the world ever heard of Martin and his talking points. People like Jan Hus, Peter Waldo, John Wycliffe were calling the church back to its biblical roots and a more faithful practice. The point is this: Luther tends to get the lion's share of the credit for the Reformation, but there were others, some martyred for their efforts, who were calling the church back to being the church. And there were still others after Luther who continued and deepened and expanded the work of reforming the church. There's another thing. Many of us were taught in confirmation class that Luther was out to create a new church. Not true. Luther and all the others were out to reform, remodel, bring the church back to its biblical and spiritual roots. The trouble was the church couldn't handle it. The church couldn't go where the Reformation voices were calling it to go. And so it was that the church split. It had happened before. The church is not unified, and it continues in three great branches: the Roman Catholic, the Orthodox, and the Protestant church. When we are at our best, we work together to further the purpose of God in the world. When we are at our worst, we treat each other as non-believers, unfaithful, and apostate. That is all a part of what we remember on this Reformation Sunday. We remember those men and women who gave their all, their talents, their intellect, their property, even their lives, to the work of making the church faithful to its God and faithful to the calling of God on its life. And this just in from the Home Office. It's happening again. Episcopal Bishop Mark Dyer suggests that every 500 years the church has a rummage sale. What he suggests is that every 500 years or so, the church puts everything it has, its beliefs, its practices, its traditions, its assumptions, the church puts it all out on tables and lets everyone have a look at it and choose some things and leave other things behind. It's a marvelous image. Can't you just picture it? All of us on a lawn, looking at tables on which sits the substitutionary theory of atonement, our understanding of biblical inerrancy, the seven-day creation, the miracles, the sacramental practices, how we do ministry and mission. It's all out on tables on a great lawn, and we're picking things up and looking at them, and we're deciding if we want to buy it or whether we can leave it behind. Every 500 years, Dyer says, as a church, we do this. I don't know if it's literally true. There seems to be some subjectivity, and when you begin the cycle, it's not particularly good history. But on this 498th anniversary of Luther nailing his papers to the church door, it's happening again. There is a new Reformation afoot, and it's coming from voices the church has rarely heard. And what the new Reformation is calling for may upset and offend the church of today, even as the Great Reformation upset and offended the church of the past. The new Reformation is calling the church to be a gathering place for all people. The homogeneous practices of the past will not hold. Back in the heart of the old Reformation, churches were places where like-minded, like-hearted people gathered together. That church was predominantly, if not purely, one race, one class, one political view. The new Reformation is calling for a church where all people are welcomed and affirmed. The new Reformation calls the church to be a place where all people of all races, of all economic strata, of all educational levels, of all expressions of gender identity, where all the distinctions and dissimilarities are welcomed and embraced. The new Reformation is calling the church to be a community of opportunities and not a place of obligation. In the old church, most of us went to church because we had to or were expected to. There was a sense of obligation to it. If we weren't there on a Sunday, people would notice and people would talk. We gave our money to the church because we were expected to. We looked at the annual budget, divided by the number of members, and submitted what was little more than our dues. It was pure transaction, a part of paying the monthly bills. The new Reformation is calling the church to be a community in which opportunities abound to connect with other people face to face. The new Reformation is calling the church to be a community in which opportunities to share in leadership, in service, in creativity, in prophetic change are the norm. The new Reformation is looking for the church to be a community in which new possibilities are conceived, embraced, and claimed, and where people are invited to take a part, not because they have to, but because they want to. The new Reformation is less about place and more about community. It may seem counterintuitive. In a day in which all of us carry a phone, are connected to satellites and advanced communication technology, we are perhaps over-informed. But the need for actual face-to-face time has never been more important. The need for human contact, for touch, for looking into eyes, connecting hearts, for engaging with others in change with others. That's what the new Reformation is calling for. And it doesn't matter where it happens. Which means that in the new Reformation, classic church buildings aren't going to matter. Towers and stained glass and pipe organs and vestments and all of the things we associate with church aren't going to make one bit of difference. Wow, is it quiet in here? The new Reformation will meet in coffee houses, people's homes, abandoned storefronts, city parks, health clubs, gyms, schools, on beaches, on mountaintops, and just about any other place you can imagine except expensive, massive, physical plants like ours. In the new Reformation, it's not going to be about where. It's going to be about who. The new Reformation will be less about gathering and more about sharing. In the old church, we adopted a business model for doing ministry. We understand that we can't spend what we don't have. We understand the cost of doing ministry. We produce our monthly profit and loss statements, factor in the costs of buildings and professional leadership, the cost of education and indoctrination, and all the rest. And then about once a year, we go looking for the financial wherewithal to make it all happen. In the new Reformation, people will give their money and time and energy directly to making a difference rather than paying for someone to do it for them. Money will be given directly to those causes and efforts that are proven to be making a difference, and not to any form of bureaucracy, local or national, that attempts to do the same. More importantly, in the new Reformation, people will want to get their hands dirty in doing mission and ministry. They may move into the neighborhoods that need to be strengthened and renewed rather than stay out in suburbia. They may have opportunities to leave the country and go to places in the world where their heart's desire meets the needs of those who dwell there. The people of the new Reformation understand what Frederick Buechner was talking about when he wrote, "The place God calls you is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet." The people of the new Reformation will take with startling seriousness the conversation Jesus had with the rich young man, in which Jesus said, "If you wish to be perfect, go sell your possessions and give the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then follow me." Now, I tell you all of that, not to sadden you or to depress you, but to say, though it may not be the church you've always known, the new Reformation brings a new life to the gospel and to the work of being Christian. I remind you of the old joke that goes, "How many Presbyterians does it take to change a light bulb?" Change? We hate change. We despise change. There's not one single solitary thing about change, especially in the church, that we like. Now you know how those who weren't crazy about Luther felt 498 years ago. But the good news is this: God is not done with the church just yet. God has work for the church to do, new work, critical work. And that work is being entrusted to a new generation of leaders, people like Nadia Bowles-Weber, Doug Paget, Brian McClure, Rachel Held Evans, Rob Bell, and Karen Ward. They are calling the church to a new way of being the church and offering leadership into what is still largely an unknown future. Through them, God is accomplishing astounding things for which every one of us should give thanks. God has work for the church to do. Good news, great news, wondrous news. There should be angels singing in the sky. Now, some of us, anyone over 50, may be a little discomforted, a little disquieted by the how and what of the new Reformation. I am in your number, and I do feel your pain. Some of our most precious things at the rummage sale may not be purchased or valued or even looked at and considered. That's okay. They spoke to us. They enriched our faith. They drew us closer to God. No one can take that away. We must find the grace and the courage to hand it over to the participants in the new Reformation and entrust to them the church we love. But none of us should be discomforted or disquieted over the why of the new Reformation. The why is simple. Because God still has work for the church to do. God is still at work, still calling people to a new life and a new way of living, still challenging the way of the world with the way of grace and mercy, still calling for justice to roll down like waters and righteousness to flow like an ever-flowing stream. There is a new Reformation at work in the church, my friends. The Spirit is at work. God still has something for the church to do. And for that we can say thanks be to God, for now and evermore. Amen.